Ever try to get building permits in Israel? It's like navigating a maze, right? Today, we're going to dig into something that might surprise you: the roots of construction and development over there. Spoiler alert, the British Empire's influence is way bigger than you might think.
It's easy to assume a country's development is its own thing, but it's usually more complicated than that. Like, take Israel under the British Mandate that's 1920 to 1948. Those few decades had a huge impact, shaping everything from how towns are laid out to the rules about putting up buildings.
Exactly. And our source for this deep dive is Liat Portal's Substack called The Liat Show: My Journey to Infinity. She's got this conversation with her father, Nissim, who's got some amazing firsthand knowledge about building regulations back then and now.
Getting that personal perspective on a historical process can be really eye-opening. What does Nisem have to say?
Well, get this. Picture a place with basically zero building codes. That's what Nissim describes under the Ottomans, who were in charge before the British. Landowners could pretty much do whatever they wanted. Need to add a second story? Go right ahead. No forms, no inspections. Sounds kind of nice in a way, doesn't it?
I guess it depends on how you look at it. But Nisem suggests that this hands-off approach wasn't always totally pure. Like, sometimes, let's just say, personal interests might have been more important than whether a building was actually safe.
Okay, so maybe some shady deals going down. But then everything changed, didn't it? Enter the British Empire. They loved their order and those super detailed plans. And we're not talking about just a few traffic circles here. Think roads, railways, hospitals, even airports. A lot of the foundation for modern-day Israel was basically a British production.
Yeah, totally. It was a time of massive change. The British were all about modernizing the region's infrastructure. They wanted to leave their mark. What's really interesting is how this went beyond just the practical stuff. Nishan talks about how cultural institutions were also developing during this time, things we don't usually connect with the British.
Oh, right. Like the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra or the Habima Theater. These were all starting up during the Mandate period. And while it was Jewish entrepreneurs and artists leading these projects, Neeson points out that it all happened with British support.
So kind of a fascinating dynamic, right? The British indirectly created an environment where these cultural institutions could grow. It shows a subtler side of their influence.
It really makes you think about this whole thing in a different way. And speaking of things we don't always see, let's get back to those building permits. We were talking about how tricky they can be to get in Israel, right? Well, guess what? The Brits had something to do with that, too.
Yeah, they were all about planning, zoning laws, building codes, master plans. Those were all things they brought in during the Mandate period. It makes sense, though, right? They were dealing with a pretty loose system under the Ottomans, trying to bring some order to the chaos.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Neeson kind of suggests that while those regulations were meant to make things safer, more organized, they also kind of paved the way for the bureaucratic mess builders have to deal with today.
Yeah, it's like the very systems designed to make things run smoothly can end up creating their own problems. It's weird how that happens.
It really is. And get this. Neeson also points out this really interesting difference in how different communities were affected during this time. So we talked about how Jewish entrepreneurs were busy setting up cultural institutions with that low-key British support, right? But the Arab community, even with its own rich history and traditions, they didn't really see that same kind of cultural development.
It's an important thing to notice, and it raises some questions about who was benefiting from the British presence. Did some groups have more advantages than others? And how did all of that shape what we see in Israel today, culturally speaking?
That's a lot to think about. But stepping back for a second, I mean, it's pretty wild to think about the stuff the British built that's still around. Some of their old military bases are being used by the IDF to this day.
It just goes to show you how much impact that era had. And it's not just military bases either. Ben Gurion Airport started as a British airfield. Or go for a walk in Tel Aviv, you'll see all those Bauhaus buildings. That style was everywhere during the Mandate.
It's like every corner you turn, there's another layer of history. You've got those ancient stories, then the Ottoman influence, and then this whole British era woven into everything.
Exactly. When we talk about the British Mandate, it's about modernization, development, sure, but it's also about the stuff they didn't plan for. The legacy's a mixed bag, both impressive and kind of messy at the same time.
Makes you wonder, what will people be saying about the stuff we're building now, like decades from now? Will they be into it, or will they be dealing with the problems we didn't think about?
For real. And you know what else Nissim talks about in Liet's Substack? It's actually a pretty thought-provoking question. He mentions how some other countries He doesn't say which ones exactly, but they've streamlined the whole building approval process,
Yeah.
made it way faster and more efficient.
Yeah, it's almost like he's challenging Liet and anyone listening to come up with something better.
Totally. He's saying, yeah, the British brought some order, but can we do it better? Are there other countries doing this whole building thing in a smarter way?
Exactly. It's like he's asking if we can have our cake and eat it too. Maybe some places have found that balance, keeping things safe but also getting things done quickly in a way that works for everyone.
Right. That's what makes this so interesting. It's not just about knowing what happened in the past. It's about using that to figure out how we move forward. So what's the answer? Is it somewhere between the Ottomans' anything goes and the British way of planning everything down to the last detail?
Right. Is there a sweet spot? Maybe, just maybe, some countries have found it. It's amazing how much this conversation has uncovered. Like, we started with building permits, and now we're talking about, like, the systems that shaped an entire country. But there's one more thing I want to touch on, this idea of legacy. It keeps coming up, right?
Definitely. I mean, we've talked about the physical stuff the British left behind, the buildings, the infrastructure. But then there's that other side of it, the impact on, institutions and cultural norms.
Totally. Like those cultural places we were talking about, the Philharmonic, the Habima Theater, those really took off during the Mandate, and they're still going strong today, which makes you think about like the ripple effect. Stuff that happened decades ago still matters now.
Just no doubt. Education, the arts, even the legal system, the British influenced all of it. And those things are like the foundation of a society. We're still feeling their impact. It shows that progress isn't just about buildings and roads. It's also about creating a space where culture and creativity can thrive.
It's like we're seeing Israel's development in a whole new light. Right, you've got the British influence all mixed up with the country's own path. It actually makes me appreciate Liat's Substack even more. She's really grappling with this idea of legacy, sharing her family story, digging into Israeli culture. It's all connected.
Yeah, she's adding her own voice to that story, don't you think? Using her platform to get conversations going, bring different perspectives to the table. It's about exploring what it means to be Israeli today.
Exactly. So for anyone listening, if you want to go deeper on any of this, definitely check out Liat's Substack. It's called The Liat Show, My Journey to Infinity.
Yeah.
Her chats with her father are super interesting, and she covers all sorts of stuff, history, culture, even food.
Sounds like my kind of reading.
Right. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive for today. We've gone from the Ottoman Empire to the British Mandate, waded through building codes, and even pondered what legacy really means.
It's been a journey, that's for sure.
It really has. Until next time, keep exploring those hidden connections. You never know what you might find.